65 years ago, that novel struck a chord. People feared the future would bring government spying on us through telescreens that were everywhere, even in our bedrooms. Big Brother was watching. When computers became popular, people feared that the internet would become government's way of controlling us. We libertarians said, no, the opposite's true. The internet and personal computer revolution has freed us from all kinds of government controls. And it did. But lately, we learned about several Orwellian-like intrusions on our privacy. Most recently, that the National Security Agency tracks our phone calls and some emails. This is a terrible threat to American liberties, says Congressman Justin Amash. So, Congressman, why? They're just mining data. They're not listening to our phone calls.
Well, it violates the Constitution. The Fourth Amendment protects us against unreasonable searches and seizures, and this clearly violates the Fourth Amendment. And the problem we have is that the government is gathering information using what's essentially a general warrant, which was outlawed by the Constitution. They're going after people not on the basis of any suspicion, not on the basis of any probable cause, but just because they're people, just because the information is useful to the government. And that's what our founders expressly prohibited with the Constitution.
Well, it's useful to me, too, if it keeps me from being blown up by a terrorist. And the fact that they're just scanning everybody in some ways makes it seem like less of an invasion of privacy.
Well, the reason the founders believed it was wrong was because we didn't want the government collecting this kind of information. They put the Constitution in place to prevent the government from injecting itself into our personal affairs. And you could do away with a lot of the Constitution and argue that maybe that makes us safer. You could also do away with the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, Fifth, Sixth, Seventh, and Eighth.
I don't want to do that.
And, well, someone could argue that and say, well, look, now the government can control everything. They can prevent all crimes. I doubt it would work very well, but that's what they could argue. But, of course, we'd have a police state, and that's expressly prohibited by the Constitution. The reason we have a Constitution is to prohibit government from doing this.
But leaving the constitutional argument just for a moment, can you make this live for me more? I don't see how my privacy is being invaded by these massive scans.
Well, that's fine if you completely trust the government. Our founders didn't trust the government. I don't trust the government. The government can use the information to, for example, blackmail corporate executives. They could use the information to persuade members of Congress to vote a certain way. And they can use the information against the public. We don't want a culture in our country of distrust, of fear. My parents came from the Middle East. They came from regimes that were tyrannical. And in those countries, people were afraid to talk on the phone. They were afraid to talk to their neighbors because they were afraid everyone was a spy for the government. We don't want that kind of culture here in this country. It has a damaging effect on our culture.
You can't see it here. I made up this list of 100 things I hate more than or as much as the NSA spying. And where do we rank this? I mean, you believe in liberty. Is it worse that they do this data mining than the fact that they employ 22 million people, that they say where our kids must go to school, that we have a $17 trillion deficit, that they pass Dodd-Frank, that there's bailouts? How much can we be angry about?
I think it's all bad, but when you have direct violations of the Constitution, when you have someone trying to infringe upon the Fourth Amendment or the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, those are serious threats against our liberty, and more serious in many ways than the kind of financial exploitation that the government's involved in. It's true that the government is bloated. There's been no bigger advocate for balancing our budget and getting our debt under control than me, but at the same time, we have to look at this stuff, our civil liberties. That's why we fought a revolution back in the 1700s, is because of civil liberties violations.
And in the 1700s, we got the Fourth Amendment, partly because British soldiers were going in people's homes and taking stuff and searching your most private space. How is looking for patterns in 1 billion phone calls anywhere like that?
Well, the problem is the legal theory they're using. The legal theory they're using is that anytime you use a third-party provider to store any of your documents, and most papers today are electronic, they're digital. So most of the papers and effects that we have in modern times are digital papers and effects. And the government is using the false and flawed logic and argument that that is all available to the public. Once you put it out on a third-party server, the government has the right to obtain it because it's no longer private. And that's ridiculous.
And what do you say to the claim that maybe 50 terrorist incidents were stopped?
We don't even know if that number is accurate. Most of the information is classified. We can't get to the bottom of it. And frankly, a lot of the court opinions that deal with these cases are classified in a way where members of Congress can't get the opinions. Part of what we're doing with our bill is trying to make sure that these cases are available to members of Congress. Right now, I actually can't read the court opinions that are interpreting laws like the Patriot Act.
Well, that certainly is a problem when they say it's secret. Trust us. Congressman Amash, thank you. I'm furious at my government all the time. On my webpage, I posted this list of 100 things that enrage me about government's overreach. The IRS bias against Tea Party groups. That's disgusting. Farm subsidies, Benghazi, corporate welfare, the minimum wage. It's all disgusting. I could go on 100 times. In fact, I could probably get to 200. But government computers scanning everybody's phone records to see patterns that might lead to terrorists? I'm conflicted about that. Judge Andrew Napolitano says I shouldn't be. I should be furious. So educate me.
I think you should be furious because you believe that we have natural rights that come from our humanity, among which is the right to be left alone, to preserve the right to be left alone, the right to privacy.
You want to be left alone by terrorists.
You also want to be left alone by the government, because if the government doesn't leave you alone, you will have no privacy. And people do not behave normally, naturally, or to their full extent when they're being watched by the government and then need the government's permission. When the government knows every phone call we make, from where we make the call, to whom we make the call, how long the call was, where they were, and can plug that into their algorithms, they can predict all kinds of behavior about us, and they're not entitled to any of it under the Constitution without a search warrant.
And I still just don't personally feel the threat. I give up all this private information, much more, to Google and Facebook.
But you do so willingly. You
True.
can decide not to deal with Google
Government
and Facebook.
is force.
Correct.
Facebook and
Correct. Government is force. Now you're coming around, John. You cannot avoid the government.
Already there.
Right. Of course you're already
And
there.
Facebook can't lock me up or assassinate me.
Correct. And the
But
government,
my information's out there.
can.
So
Look,
when you say they can look at all this, I figure there's some pimply kid just intercepting it in the air as it ships
your
through.
information is not out there.
It's flying through the air, these electronic waves. Don't you assume Media Matters is hacking some of your information?
But Media Matters does not protect me from the government. The Fourth Amendment does. Media Matters, just like Fox News, just like Google and Facebook, are free to do things that the government is not free to do. That's why we have this Fourth Amendment, to keep the government out of our bank books and out of our bedrooms and, frankly, John, off our backs. Which is worse? That a renegade former spy divulge the truth about government lawbreaking, or that government officials lie about what he exposed?
And picking up on your which is worse theme for something else, I have anger fatigue. Is this worse than our $17 trillion debt, than the drug war, than what we've done to American Indians, and so on?
I don't know if it is worse than that, but it could lead to something that's worse than that.
Could lead the slippery slope.
Yes, of course, to the slippery slope. I mean, a single phone call in the computer of a single spy is innocuous. But all of our phone calls in there, revealing everything about ourselves, exposing our innermost thoughts and behavior to the government, will eventually turn us into East Germany, where the government knows who did wrong, and the government knows who did wrong, and the government prosecutes people who didn't squeal on their neighbors. In the last 5 years of that society, the most frequently prosecuted crime was the failure to turn in one's neighbor. Do we really want that society here? That's what this will bring us to.
We do not. But then What do you say about two respected libertarians? You know who they are. I assume you respect them. Richard Epstein and Roger Pilon wrote, "The critics would be more credible if they could identify a pattern of government abuses. But after 12 years of continuing practices, they can't cite even a single case."
They are both friends of mine and friends and colleagues of yours, and we disagree profoundly. If seizing the private thoughts of every American is not a pattern of government abuse, I don't know what is. Think of it this way. The government's powers derive from the consent of the governed. Did you consent to this? Do you know anybody on the planet who consented to this?
People, the terrorism fear is overblown, but people who are frightened consent to this.
They can consent to it for themselves, but not for the rest of us. Thank you.
Here's what our president said in response to criticism about the NSA spying.
And if people can't trust not only the executive branch, but also don't trust Congress and don't trust federal judges to make sure that we're abiding by the Constitution, due process, and rule of law, then we're going to have some problems here.
It's an absolute canard. After Benghazi, the Associated Press, the Rosen affair, and the IRS, nobody trusts this administration. And who would trust Congress when they, like Senator Wyden, whose heart is in the right place, were told what the NSA was doing but took an oath not to reveal it? And who would trust these federal judges who've granted 99.6% of every application sought before them?
Who else do we have for oversight but Congress and these federal judges?
Transparency. When the public knows what's going on, the government will be afraid to trample our rights. The government has created a bizarre system of secret courts and secret information to the Congress. Congressmen know about it. They can't tell anybody about it. They can't vote about it.
Spying. It's based on secrecy. I mean, maybe we shouldn't do any spying.
They can spy on foreigners all they want. But I didn't authorize a government to spy on me, and you didn't authorize this government to spy on you.
No, I did not. When the NSA data mining was revealed, I felt threatened. Here's my government caught lying again. They secretly vacuum up data we thought was private. I don't want my government to know everything about me. Some things ought to be private. Now, the government says the data helped them prevent 50 terrorist incidents. 50? I don't believe it. Bureaucrats always exaggerate the value of their work. Why would this be different? Because it's the Homeland Security state? No. People keeping secrets are more prone to embellish. Now, the spies say what they do is constitutional. Federal judges approve everything. They won't abuse this power. But I don't trust them. They always abuse power. As one libertarian blogger put it, we're all going to suffer from the power of the NSA if we don't check them now.